Hey from Texas, it's Lindy Fulford again with Striking Splendor. And I'm here to go ahead and do part 2 of my story on how marriage counseling saved my marriage. But this is kind of a detour. This is more about the father of the bride. And I want to remind everybody that everything that I say is 100% true according to how I remember it. And so I could have things way off. But this is how I remember it in my brain, and it might be a little twisted, or it might not. So this is kind of a detour from how marriage counseling saved my marriage, but I think it's a really important part of the story, just because if I knew then what I know now, this might have been written a little bit differently. So I'm going to read some of this just because I want to make sure I don't miss any parts, because I think it's an important part. So in 1995, my dad had been retired from Bergstrom Air Force Base for 4 years. He'd retired with the rank of Chief Master Sergeant, and he and my stepmom Nell moved to their fish camp in 1998 out in Granite Shoals to relax and fish. And the following year, my dad began having some pain and went to the doctor. And I don't recall the details, like I said. It's all a little bit fuzzy in my brain. I was pretty young. And but I know I had lots of tests done, including an MRI. I hadn't been working at Dell very long. I was a switchboard operator, and unfortunately, I received a call one day, and it was my sister. I think it was my sister Kim that called me, but honestly, I'm not real sure on that as well. But that was the news that I got, that the test of my dad's MRI had come back, and he had cancer. Not only did he have cancer, he had prostate cancer, and it had already metastasized throughout his body. So it was stage 4, and it was up and down his spine, and he only had about 2 years to live. So I was devastated. Obviously, my dad and I had a bit of a strained relationship growing up. I, like many of you, come from a divorced family. I was 8 years old when my parents divorced, and I really don't have a lot of memories from before then. I'm not sure why. But then again, I don't have a lot of memories from yesterday either, or the day before. I think that's just my brain. So we didn't have all this technology to keep in touch. We couldn't just email schedules or post them on Facebook or however, couldn't just text them. We actually had to pick up the phone or write it down and drop them off. And somewhere, any of you that have teenagers, you know that even with all this technology, it's still hard to keep track of schedules. It's crazy ridiculous. So our lines of communication weren't that great. But something spectacular happened in 1996. So just 5 years going back, before my dad passed away, a beautiful baby girl was born. That was my little sweet Ashlyn. And somehow it mended the relationship with my dad. There was no aha moment. There was no moment where I went, oh, now we have to be this great family. It's just one of those things, and I mentioned it in one of my lives before, which sometimes you're brought back together. It can be because of a death. It can be because of a birth. There's so many different things that can bring people together. And for my dad and I, it was the birth of my daughter. It just kind of put all that miscommunication and pettiness aside, and it was like a fresh start. So fast forward, I'm now a single parent, working a night shift. Luckily for me, I'm a single parent, but I have help. My mom helped watch Ashlyn during the week. My dad and Nell helped watch Ashlyn on the weekends. So it was fantastic to have that help. Reject. So I believe that's also part of what helped build the relationship, is just that we had to spend so much time together. They really helped me out. You guys, being a single parent is no joke, and being a teenage single parent is no joke either. I was very lucky and blessed to have my mom and my dad Nell to help me through that situation. So fast forward to late August, early September 2001, and I remember my dad coming home to visit after he'd taken a trip to his dad's and sister's in Oklahoma. And he came into the house with a walking cane. It was the first time that I'd ever seen my dad need help to walk. And unfortunately, his health quickly went down from there. It was from the walking cane to I remember him having a walker, wheelchair, and then he was eventually bedridden. It was really hard to see. If any of you have ever seen anyone go through this process, it's very devastating. But the moment I finally realized that my dad was truly sick, I definitely wish I could erase that memory. So I don't know why it took me so long. It's interesting when you know somebody's getting ready to pass away. At least for me, it's almost like I didn't take it seriously. Like I still thought I had forever with my dad. But I was out visiting my dad now at their lake house, and late one evening I heard my stepmom yell from the bathroom that I needed to go get my neighbor Chris. And my dad had fallen. My dad had fallen, and he couldn't get himself back up, and she couldn't get him up either. So I ran next door, and luckily Chris was there with his friends, and he came over and he helped get my dad up. And that was the first time I realized that, like I wrote here, his once strong legs were now just heavy and lifeless. And that was the first time I really realized that my dad was so sick. And I just want to say here, thank you, Chris. I don't know if you remember that moment, but it's one of those times I really appreciate you very much. So soon thereafter, in late September or early October, my dad was finally moved to bed, and he was placed in the living room because it was the best view of the lake. And the last weekend before he passed, my sisters and I all stayed out at the lake house with him. We didn't realize that he was going to pass that Monday, but we got to spend the whole weekend with him. And it was truly special. At the same time, it was a really hard weekend to get through. Again, if you've ever been through this, so my daughter was out there, and at that point, my dad didn't remember who I was. He thought Ashlyn was me. But we still had some interesting things that happened. We had some good laughs. He was calling my sister Donita Pecos Joe. And at one point, the pastor came by, and we stood around his bed while the pastor said a nice prayer, and my dad opened his eyes and looked around the room and said something like, "Am I gone?" So, and then there was the time he thought that his truck was going into the lake, and I had to pretend like I was running to go get it. So we did have some good laughs, unfortunately. But it was a really, really good final weekend. So I had left and went back home because I was starting a new job on that Monday. And I remember that morning I got a call from my sister Donita, who told me that hospice had said we only had 24 hours left. And my boss had told me I could go ahead and go, and I didn't. I stayed a little bit longer because it was my first day at work, and I didn't want people to think badly of me. Again, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have left immediately. But instead, I stayed around. I left. I went home, made some calls about some bridesmaids' dresses. Again, if I'd have known then what I know now, I would have left immediately. I started to head out to Granite Shoals, and I got right in front of the Dell campuses in Round Rock when I received that call from my sister that let me know that my dad had taken his last breath. So if I'd have known then what I know now, I would have communicated better with my dad. I would have spent the last few years making more memories and taking more pictures. I'd have spent more time fishing with him and less time out dancing. I would have had long conversations to clear the air. I would have gone to doctor's appointments with him to help take some of the burden off of Nell. I would have pulled the table up to his wheelchair and played rummy with him, and I would have sat by his bedside and listened to his stories about Vietnam. I would have read to him, and I would not have gone to work that Monday. I would not have been worried about what my new coworkers would think if I left early on my first day. I would not have spent time worried about bridesmaid dresses. If only I had known then what I know now. My father passed away 4 months before Scott and I were married. My mom took some pictures of me in my wedding dress, and I was able to share those with my dad before he passed. I would have given anything for my dad to have been able to walk me down the aisle. But I'm also grateful that he no longer had to suffer that battle because it was a bad one. So I'm going to leave you with a letter that my dad typed up. It was funny when I was writing this blog, I happened to be going through some boxes, and I found this box that I knew he'd given me. And I'd forgotten about this. And so it really means a lot. He gave me this letter and an angel necklace before he passed. So bear with me as I try and get through it. It says, Lindy, my little baby, and you always will be my little girl, who has become the most independent grown-up little girl. You really have made me proud so many times. You came out running as a baby and kept me and your mother busy trying to keep up with you. My little girl that I cried over so many times, especially after your mother and I decided that we needed to part. I missed you desperately, but you know the recent past years have been some of the best years that I've spent with you. I love fishing with you, out on the dock, and just plain hanging out together. Thanks, Lindy, for giving your old dad some quality time. I know that I will not have to worry about you, Lindy. You are just like me, a survivor. You will not only make it, but you will make it big. You gave me my first granddaughter, who truly has become our bright, shining star, as Granny Nell has tagged her. Thank you so much for a terrific little girl. I know that you will have a very wonderful future ahead of you, and I will not have to worry. Thank you, Lindy, for being a great daughter. You've made your dad very proud. I will always love you deeply. Your dad. Whew, sorry about that. This is one of my favorite pictures of my dad, Ashlyn, fishing on the docks. I just feel like that's kind of important through the whole grand scheme of things, as I'm talking about how Scott and I made it through a really hard part in our lives because of marriage counseling. Because again, I think if you look back on, if you knew then, or if you knew now what you knew then, how many times we would change things. We would pick up the phone, we would take time to spend with one another. Time passes by so quickly, and we never just stop to take it in. And then something like this happens, and somebody gets sick, and somebody passes away, or you get one of those phone calls in the middle of the night, and you always say you're going to make a change, and you're going to keep in touch. And unfortunately, a lot of times that just doesn't happen. It's all too true. I've seen it even within my own family. So I just want you to take a moment tonight and hug your loved ones. Reach out. You guys, we have text nowadays. We have Facebook. There's so many ways to get in touch with people. Take some time and communicate. Send them a text. Just let them know you're thinking about them. All right, you guys. I will catch you on the other side.